Okay. So as Jenna mentioned, today we're going to be talking about inclusive sampling strategies and specifically strategies that you can use to encourage participation from underrepresented groups. So as Jenna mentioned, I'm Emily. I'm the UX strategist here at Aten. I have about 14 years of experience doing this kind of research, specifically behavior research. And so I'm really excited to talk to you today about some strategies I've learned along the way on how to encourage participation from underrepresented groups. So I think it's always helpful to talk first about a full service redesign. So a full service redesign, if we maybe think about a house, is kind of taking the house, maybe keeping some of the bones and just starting from scratch, starting over. So we would take your website and create something totally new. And to do that, we work in 3 phases. The first phase is the strategy phase. The second, we hand it off to design. And from design, it goes into development. So what goes on during the strategy phase? The strategy phase is where we build all of our evidence to move into design and then development. So all of the decisions that we make about layout, style, information architecture, backend development, those rely on good evidence from your user base. And this is formed in the strategy phase. So typically we start off by reviewing any existing material that your company has. So maybe you've already done some user research, you have some ongoing research, you might have analytics. And so we like to review any work that you've done to date. Once we've taken some time to review the materials and align on the goals for the redesign, we start doing original user research. And this is the true north. This is every time we have questions in design and dev, we always come back to that. So what does user research look like? User research, when we think about talking to users, it typically falls into 2 categories. The first category that we'll talk about today is qualitative research. So that refers kind of to a conversational style of data collection. This is a nice method because oftentimes we have questions about why users do what they do. What are kind of the motivations behind their behaviors? So qualitative research gives us the why behind the what. Some of the hallmarks, some of the methods that we use are in-depth interviews. So that's when a trained researcher would have a conversation one-on-one with a user. Focus groups, which is a facilitated conversation among several users. Contextual inquiry, where we might just observe users in their context using our site. And there's several other methods that we can use, and those are the hallmarks of qualitative research. Quantitative research, on the other hand, refers to research that describes how often something does or does not occur. So quantitative research helps us understand generalizability. So what that means basically is, let's say we understand that there's some errors in our navigation, and we might learn that through qualitative interviews. If we only interview a very small number of people, we don't know how often that happens among all of the people that come to your website. And that's where we rely on quantitative research to tell us how often something occurs. So methods like analytics, surveys, A/B testing, those are the cornerstones of quantitative research. So why am I telling you all this? Well, before we might decide on qualitative or quantitative research, and then we need to think about who we're going to talk to or who we're going to sample. So we decide on the methods, now we need to draw a sample. So what is a sample? A sample is a small group of users that represent the whole, right? So when we think about everybody that comes to your website, we're not going to talk to every single person, right? We're going to draw a sample. And when we draw a sample, typically we need a sampling strategy. So a sampling strategy refers to the process of determining representation. When we decide to sample a population, we want to make sure that the people that we talk to represent the characteristics of people that come to our website. So how do we develop that? When we think about when we think about drawing a sample and a sampling strategy, we think about a few things. The first thing I like to think about is the audience composition. So this is a good exercise in thinking about all of the people who come to your website and all the people who may come to your newly designed website. And remember, those two things could be different. So when reflecting on your audience, some questions that are helpful to ask yourself include, who is your audience? So who comes to your website? Do they fall along certain political orientations, gender or cultural lines? Are there specific age groups that visit your website? And similarly, you might consider whether your website is for a broad audience or for a certain group of people. For instance, you might have a website that caters specifically to politically active people. You might have a website for a specific subject matter, in which case your audience may be more narrow. Or maybe you have a website and you think everybody in the world would benefit from coming to your website, which is amazing. So it's really important to consider that before we start recruiting users. And it's also really important to think about the context of your users' lives. What variables might affect their interactions with your website? Are some of them non-native English speakers? Will they be using a wide array of devices? Will any of them have disabilities that you need to account for? And along with audience composition, it's a great time to start thinking about accessibility. So some of you have websites that are beholden to the WCAG standards as part of federal or state law. WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, are standards for making web content accessible. These guidelines give information about contrast levels, optimizing your website for assistive devices, and optimizing your content for readability. So accessibility is really important. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, but the extent to which your website adheres to those guidelines is often a reflection to your audience of how inclusive you are. So we've thought about who our audience is. Now we want to think about our goals. What are our goals for these redesigns? So what does success look like in a redesign? What should users be able to do on your website that they're not able to do now? Are you hoping to reach a broader audience? Do you want your content to be more accessible so your audience expands? Do you hope to make your narrative tighter, more concise, so you can focus on a niche group of people, but maybe invite more people in that group to join? Is your content for everybody? Are they for subject matter experts? If so, what do you hope your content will do that it isn't currently doing? Do you want your message to have more impact? Do you want your content to be better organized? So this is just kind of a small section of questions you can ask yourself. And it's important that we work together to understand your goals so that we can sample appropriately. If, for instance, your goal is to create content for a broader audience, we want to make sure to include a variety of people in our sample to evaluate the current content and learn more about how we can update or streamline it to entice new users. And finally, not necessarily related to the nuts and bolts of sampling, but equally important, is the kind of investment that you can make in the strategy phase. And I know oftentimes, especially with our clients and especially now, budgets and resources are tight. So this piece of the puzzle influences how much we can devote to recruitment. Most often, clients tend to leverage the users they already know or stakeholders as proxies for users. So this can be an effective strategy. And in the following sections, we'll walk through some examples where we've done that, and I'll offer you some other tactics that you can try to ensure your sample is inclusive. So the first example I'd like to start with is a client of ours that had a narrow audience. They wanted to increase their reach, and they had a very small budget. So this client is ILES, or the Institute for the Advancement of the American Legal System. IELTS came to us for something called a retheme. So I know earlier we talked about a redesign, and they came to us specifically with a retheme. So a retheme often has a much lower budget, and this is when a client wants to refresh the look and feel of their website, but for resource or timeline reasons, they can't do a full redesign. They can't commit to like knocking the house down and building it from scratch. So this usually means that we update some of the elements of the design and the content across the board, but usually leave the navigation as it is. So for this client, we followed the same process of strategy, design, and development, but leverage the strategy phase as a time to understand where we should focus our retheme efforts. So we had a limited budget and we wanted to get a sense of how users feel about the website and where the major pain points are. So first we started at looking at the audience. And so ISLES is an organization that's dedicated to improving the civil justice system. The civil justice system exists apart from the criminal justice system. It's the system you might lean on if you need to take somebody to small claims court, sue somebody or a corporation for damages, or any issue that involves disputes between people or organizations, or in between two people. ISLES creates evidence-based practice guidelines, think pieces, and other in-depth content to guide policymakers and other interested parties on how to create a more civil justice system. So as you might surmise, the audience of ISLES is fairly niche. Policymakers, maybe lawyers interested in collaborating on think pieces, and civil justice court officials comprise the primary audience. So since our budget was limited and ISLES has dedicated members of their coalition, we opted to speak with a small sample of people with whom ISLES already had a pre-existing relationship and would volunteer to help us with our retheme. And so once we knew, we kind of had a sense of who ISLES audience is, we wanted to think about the goals. So ISLES they were really interested in expanding their reach within their audience. How can we reach more policymakers? How can we get our mission out there? How can we help people understand who we are? They had a sense that their website wasn't necessarily easy to navigate, and it wasn't easy for potential collaborators or donors to quickly understand ISLES' mission and impact. So in addition to speaking with ISLES team members themselves, we leveraged their existing analytics and learned that most people go to a specific report page and bypass the homepage completely. And interestingly, most people spend a good 2 to 3 minutes on a page, which is pretty long given that we're saturated with content between 30 and 60 seconds on social media. So this information, again, coupled with their audience and their budget constraints, informed our sampling strategy. So what was our strategy? So as I mentioned, we reached out to a small subset of ISLES users. Even with the intended goal of driving traffic and raising awareness, since we had no aspirations to transform this into a general public website for the medium term at least, we decided that we could leverage this group of people. And we decided to make sure that we varied a small group of people. So we talked to about 7 users, and we decided to break them up into newer users and power users. We used experience with website as a proxy for usability. In general, if somebody is a power user, they'll be really familiar with the site navigation. So maybe they won't help us identify holes in navigation. But what they've done is they've likely created their own workarounds from working within a site for a long time. So in user research, these workarounds give us insight into the user's mental model. Workarounds tell us how site navigation or content organization should be. Newer users, on the other hand, are not going to be very familiar with the navigation, and just by virtue of being less experienced, right? So they also give us a sense of how effectively ISLES is communicating their message. Do newer users understand the mission? Can they articulate it? How did they find ISLES? Power users generally have been around so long that they can't recall such information, but newer users see the site with fresh eyes. So with this criteria in mind, ISLES worked with us and they sent some recruitment emails to people who were participating or enthusiastic about participating in the study. And so we conducted a series of interviews, and what did we learn? So as you can see here on this screenshot, one of the key things is that the homepage doesn't really give any information about ISLES. Above the fold, it's basically this image. So it's really tough to know all of the great work that they do with just the trending topic above the fold. I don't have any idea, the users don't have any idea who ISLES is, what their mission is. Most people that we talked to had just been referred to by other people who have worked with ISLES in the past. Users found that they love ISLES, but don't necessarily refer people to the website because it would be hard for new people to understand the mission and the identity of IELTS. Next, we also talked about donations. And so users often struggle to find the IELTS specific donation page. They found this little button in the corner, and that takes you to a DU page. And that was not clear to users. DU is Denver University. So the lack of narrative on the homepage is also kind of detrimental to receiving donations. A lack of narrative on the whole doesn't give you any impact, any sense of impact, any statistics, anything that might compel you as a user to donate. So we had both a navigation problem, it was hard to find the actual donation page, and a storytelling problem. So we learned that even power users struggled to find the correct donation page. And while they could articulate what made IELTS really special, it was hard to find those examples on the website. So that influenced how we think about a retheme. So generally, like I mentioned earlier, retheme is a light touch across the board. But for us, it was clear that with a few tweaks on some pages, it would give IELTS a lot of value and some great opportunities to tell their story. So this helped us focus our efforts on creating an effective homepage narrative, giving them new content types on the homepage and the donation page to tell their story, and a cleaner donation page that would incorporate more impact and more statistics to compel users to support the mission of IELTS. The website hasn't been released yet, but we can show you we'll send messages and show you those mock-ups when they're available. So the next example I want to walk through is a much different client. This client had a broad audience, they wanted a broad impact, and they're resource conscious but had more resources to spend. And this is the Los Angeles Public Library. So the Los Angeles Public Library really prioritizes an inclusive, diverse, and equitable space where people can read, seek help, or research freely. And LAPL was committed to a full redesign. And so essentially, again, they were ready to knock the house down and build from scratch. They have 77 branches across LA, and in addition to a robust collection of books, ebooks, and film, they have unique and special research collections. They offer social services and put on regular events across all branches in LA. So in order to begin the strategy phase, we first wanted to examine the audience of LA, or LAPL. And who is the audience? It is everybody. I mean, everyone in Los Angeles, right? And Los Angeles, as we know, is a huge city and it's a melting pot. So in contrast to IELTS, the audience is about as broad as you can get. So when dealing with a broad audience, it becomes critical to get a sample that is both inclusive and representative. This takes quite a bit of work and considerable resource investments. But when the audience that you serve is greatly impacted by several variables we talked about earlier, English language ability, any cognitive visual hearing impairments, maybe they've recently re-entered society from prison, etc. Our word choice matters and our content matters. It needs to be reflected back to them in a way that resonates. And so moving forward, we knew that we had to include a lot of different kinds of people. And now we think about the goals. As you can see in this screenshot, the screenshot kind of illustrates the sheer amount of content that the LAPL needs to organize. So this is just a sample of, this is the ebook page, but you can go up to the top menu and you can see a drop down of all of the programs that they have, services and events, locations. On the left here, you can look at different types of media and check out books. They've put a menu here on the left, but it's a lot. It's a bit of cognitive overload. So the LAPL knew that their content needs a refresh, their navigation needs to be more intuitive, and the look and the feel of the site doesn't really represent who they are. Their goals were to understand where the major usability barriers are, top tasks that users come to the website for, and in general, what does LAPL mean to the users? How important is it to them? What are the aspects that really resonate with them? And so from there, we developed our strategy. The screenshot here on the left is just an example of some of the demographics you might find in LA. So since the redesign was a robust endeavor, we decided to pursue a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods. So recall from earlier, qualitative methods are conversational and they surface motivations and attitudes and behaviors. And quantitative data tells us how often something is happening. So that means we decided to do a mix of workshops, focus groups, interviews, surveys, and an analytics review. So sampling in this case was no small task. We wanted to consider all of the elements of our audience, so we used a few techniques to make sure that our sample was inclusive. First, our survey was sent out to thousands of respondents via email. We used a list developed by LAPL of library patrons. The survey, in order to be inclusive, the survey was translated into the major languages spoken in LA. Additionally, words are difficult today. Additionally, we made an effort to demographic match to the city of LA. So we made an effort, as you can see here on the screenshot, to try and include people in the percentages that are in LA. So we want to make sure we have about the same, percentage representation of persons 65 and older, of different genders, races, all of that kind of thing. We want to make sure that that matches the population of LA. We did something similar with interviews and focus groups. In addition to speaking with LAPL staff, we spoke to users of different socioeconomic backgrounds, races, genders, social roles, and spoke to people throughout all parts of LA. And again, these participants were recruited by LAPL. By considering not only demographics, but geographic factors as well, we got a complete sense of how geography affects library usability, how different groups of people interact with the library and what it means to them, and how each group prioritizes what they want from their local library branch. It's important to remember that this did not happen overnight. This strategy phase took place over months and again involved us coordinating in-person interviews in LA, survey distribution and analysis, and we recorded the analytics over a period of 6 months. So we did all of this work. We made sure that our sample was inclusive. So what did we learn? We had hundreds of pages to go through, thousands of surveys responses, and just an overwhelming amount of information. And so I'm going to walk you through a few of the key highlights, which include a sense of place and community. Users take pride in their local branch and want more information specific to their branch displayed in a more prominent way. Events are also really critical to users, and the way that the search events function doesn't really help them find what they need. So another example, as we were doing qualitative research, is coming up with personas. And so remember, we just talked about a sense of community, right? So it's important for us to think about all of the people, all of the entire audience of LAPL, and then help divide them up into personas. And so one of the personas that came out of our research are caregivers and working parents. So caregivers and working parents, as you can imagine, have a lot going on. They're really distracted and they're doing the best that they can for the people that they take care of. Their motivating behaviors, like what motivates them to engage with the library, are free, enriching resources and family-friendly events. Caregivers and working parents often rely on social media and local networks to learn about the event environment, and how user-friendly the event is. So this isn't necessarily just about being able to register for an event, but as you can see, some of the challenges they're facing are knowing before they go somewhere, is the event ADA compliant? Is there parking? Is it easy to find where I'm supposed to go? Is it easy to remember any documentation that I need to bring? Additionally, a lot of people in this group that we spoke to had limited digital literacy, and English was not the primary language. So that tells us, and we'll talk a little bit about how we apply this, that we really need to prioritize simple, straightforward instructions and make sure that we have a lot of information about the event itself available so caregivers can decide if it's the right event for them to attend. Another group that may not be very surprising are avid readers. And so this is an incredibly different subset of people. This group of users regularly want to engage with a diverse range of material. They're super interested in finding new material, and they're interested in finding new material from recommendations, maybe based like from librarians, right? They also enjoy the ability to catalog everything that they've read and share that passion with their friends and family. So some of the pain points that they experience have to do with some inconsistencies between the catalog and the website, access and availability. So maybe it's difficult to find the thing that they want to read. There's long wait times. And again, the search function doesn't necessarily work as it's intended. Outside of personas, we had a few key findings that apply to everybody. One of them, patrons have a branch that they consult specifically, right? So branch specificity. Users have one branch, that's where they go, that's what they're interested in. So this becomes important on a website when we think about sorting and filtering categories and making it easy for users to understand and find things. If most users in this case understand libraries by branch, we want to make sure that we allow them to filter by that category, right? And along with that, but a more abstract finding is a sense of community. So the nuts and bolts of a website are critical to a redesign. And by that, I kind of mean the technical architecture, how people get where they need to go, and kind of what the content is that they engage with. But there's also this broader sense of identity. So when users tell us that the library is a space of connection and community, we want to reinforce that throughout the whole of the site. And this is often where design comes in. Design is here to help you select visual layouts that represent these ideals and give you a sense of identity. So how did all of this apply to what we did with LAPL? Well, again, we're currently in the process of redesign, but I use this information in collaboration with our design director to create wireframes that ultimately give LAPL the type of content that they need to create a more community-oriented website. And so by that, we have to think through, whether or not we need images to tell our stories, what those images should look like, what they should include, how much text, should it be text heavy, not text heavy? And so we also worked with LAPL to develop a more robust search interface, redesign their search page, and in essence, we completely transform the LAPL website that showcases their human first and service first values. So before we kind of launch into some of the tactics breakdown, I kind of want to talk about things that I think are incredibly important to consider when you're evaluating your website. And these are very general, broad considerations. And some statistics that I think are really important to keep in mind are literacy statistics in the US. So it is true that 54% of US adults have a reading level of sixth grade or below. 64% of US adults have a numeracy level of 2 or below, which is basic or below. And 34% of US adults have a health literacy level of basic or below. And in case you don't know, numeracy refers to the ability to use and interpret numbers in a meaningful way. So I think that it's so important to remember on a broad level that the people who use our website have, again, really unique lives and challenges outside of the content that we provide. So it's crucial to meet people where they're at by taking this human-centered approach. Oops. Some other really important statistics, I think, are statistics around accessibility. So globally, about 16% of the population, or 1.3 billion people, have some kind of disability. Over 3 billion people worldwide have a neurological condition, including dementia, epilepsy, autism, that affect how they interact with devices. And according to the Pew Research Center, 21.6% of people speak a language other than English at home. So if you're preparing for an upcoming strategy phase of a redesign, or maybe you're just curious about how you can be more inclusive when you do a customer satisfaction survey or a usability survey, or if you want to learn how to make your website more inclusive, these are really important things to consider. So if you're going forward then to start sampling users, we want to think about how to include all of these people. I see something in the chat. The language set is US. Yes, correct. So what are some tactics that you can try? So the first thing I like to talk about are screeners. So screeners are questions that you can use before you allow people to participate in a survey or an interview process. So typically, when we're mindful of inclusivity, we launch a screener and we wait for a set number of responses. So before we send out a survey, we send out a screener survey. So this is here, as you can see, this is step 1 of 8. A lot of screener surveys look like demographic surveys, but we can add a couple of things to them to help us incorporate the population we want to speak to. So, for instance, if we're really concerned about age and age groups, we might want to say, okay, I'm going to send this survey out to 1,000 people. Of those 1,000 people, I want at least 500 or 600 participants to be 35 years or older. Or maybe I want a younger demographic, right? So we can decide who to allow in our survey and who to reject based on some of the answers to questions that we put in a screener. And that helps us make sure that we're representing the groups that we really want to hear from. Another thing that you can include on your screener that helps you facilitate the participation of people who maybe have low literacy or low health literacy is something called the Single Item Literacy Screener, or sometimes it's referred to SILS. It's just one question. It's right here on the screen. How often do you need to have someone help you when you read instructions, pamphlets, or other written material from your doctor or pharmacy? So this is a well-accepted and valid measure of literacy and health literacy. It's a scored system, so it's 1 through 5, never as 1, always as 5. Generally, anybody who scores 3 or higher, we consider low health literacy or low literacy. And again, there are other screeners that you can use that are much longer, but if you're looking for a really quick way to make sure that your sample is inclusive of people who have low literacy or low health literacy specifically, this is a really nice and elegant way to do that. The next screener, or the next kind of approved measure, is the subjective numeracy score. So this is helpful for numeracy, or gauging how people meaningfully use numbers. And this can be particularly useful, like if you have a data-centric site and you want to reach a broad audience, including individuals who have low numeracy. So having them evaluate your content can illuminate where you need to make your content more accessible to reach more people. So keep in mind, this scale is subjective. So you're looking at it and you're kind of evaluating based on how you feel. It's scored on a scale of 1 to 6. Again, 1, not at all, 6, extremely good. And as it's written in the screener, it's just numbers across the board with the extremes labeled, but the middles are not labeled. So the user picks a number, and that's the feeling they have associated with this question. And the number is a point score, 1 through 6. You can sum or you can average it. There's actually like no standard scoring method in that way. People have used both. And so it doesn't matter as long as you're consistent across the board. For us, so again, the higher the number, the better the numeracy, right? So looking at kind of 4 and below, we would suggest that they would be low numeracy users. So some other screening example questions I've used in the past and I like to suggest, you can ask, what is the primary language you speak at home? You can leave that as an open text field, or you can give a list of languages, however you want to handle that. I need materials translated into other languages, always, sometimes, never. Or I use or have used assistive technology to help me while I use websites. And so, again, if you send the screener out before you pass people through to your survey, you can decide how much of your sample should be people who don't speak English at home, should be people who use or have used assistive technology devices. The next thing to consider is something called oversampling. So maybe you have a website and you want to hear from a specific group of people. Maybe you're trying to reach Hispanic Latino individuals, maybe because they don't traditionally participate in research studies as often as their counterparts. So, and you might find that you're trying to reach Hispanic Latino individuals and you just don't have any feedback from them. So what you might want to do is, again, send out a demographic survey and only sample or oversample Hispanic Latino population. So if we have like a sample of 1,000, maybe you want 750 to be Hispanic Latino, knowing that maybe half of them will participate, right? So it is a strategy that you can use where you send out a lot of surveys to a specific group of people that you think are unlikely to respond to make sure the numbers are on par with where you expect them to be. This is an excellent way to solicit feedback and get feedback from underrepresented groups. So a couple of other techniques I want to talk about are, this is not necessarily related to screening, but proxies. So maybe you have a group of people that are clandestine. They're really hard to reach. Let's say immigrants, for example. The social climate often precludes immigrants from participating in studies. It can be downright dangerous to do that from their perspective. So what do? Well, if, for example, someone in your organization regularly does outreach with immigrants, they might be able to serve as a representative or what's called a proxy. We want to approximate the user experience. Social workers, advocates, lawyers, anybody who's willing to give their time to your redesign, they're great people to leverage that can serve as representatives for this group. And this, of course, applies to all groups. This is just an example. The next one I want to talk about, and can be an ethically sticky one, so we'll talk about this, is snowball sampling. So snowball sampling is labeled that because as you roll a snowball down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So we use a known representative from a community that's hard to reach, and we leverage their relationships to encourage participation. For example, maybe you're interested in getting perspective for formerly incarcerated folks. So you work with somebody who maybe was formerly incarcerated themselves, and they're connected with other formerly incarcerated people. This might help encourage people to participate in your study. But I have a strong word of caution on this one. It can be a really ethically tricky line to walk, and we always want to respect the autonomy and privacy of our users. Using this method, it really needs to be done with care in the most vulnerable communities. So make sure that you have bulletproof data privacy practice. Do not collect any identifying information. Don't even ask their name. And always give the person a way to stop the interview or back out if they're uncomfortable and they don't want to participate. In general, with a website redesign, I think once people get comfortable, they realize it's not necessarily like dangerous territory, but it's always, always important to operate as if that were the case. So make sure consent is ongoing. Make sure you have something that tells them exactly what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about, and check in throughout the interview to make sure the participant is still comfortable. And finally, I want to talk about accessible content. So if you want to make sure that you have an inclusive space, independent of even sampling, there are some things you can do off the bat. You can do things like check to make sure that your website content is written at a 6th grade level or below. There's no large blocks of text, and it's free from jargon. You can evaluate your website to see how it stacks against WCAG standards. And if you're interested in having a tool do that for you, because maybe you're not so familiar with WCAG guidelines, there are a couple tools here. AudioEye, accessibilitychecker.org, and a host of others are free to use, and that will help get you started to give you kind of a sense of where you stand on accessibility. At Aten, we do accessibility reviews as well, and we do them much more in depth that you would get from a free tool. But if this is kind of a good way to get you started and make you kind of aware of how your website is performing.